Hello, and welcome to Stories from the View, a podcast from the Pleasant View Senior Center in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. On this podcast, we invite East Longmeadow residents to tell us their stories about their lives and events. Today's guest is Jim Rintoul of Community Feed. And here's your host, Mary Jenowin Kaplan.
Good morning. Thank you, Eric. And welcome, Jim, to Stories from the View. We are so delighted that you're here to tell your story. We could almost call it Jim's perspective from East Longmeadow. So we're all ears. Jim, tell us how it started.
Okay. I was born in April of 1942. Happened to be my father's birthday. He was of Scottish descent, and he bragged for the rest of his life that he had, it was a Scotchman's trick that there was one birthday cake for two birthdays. So we went that way. I was born in Stafford Springs, Connecticut. Why? When I lived on Prospect Street in East Longmeadow with my parents, was I born in Stafford Springs? Well, it was 4 months after Pearl Harbor. My mother was afraid that the Springfield armories were going to be bombed, so she went and found a doctor in Summers, a Dr. Thayer, and he practiced at Johnson Memorial Hospital. It wasn't the location where it is today. It was over the mountain down in the village. Mm-hmm. But that's where my life got started. A couple of stories. My sister remembers, I don't remember this, but my sister remembers the air raid drills in East Longmeadow when she was, I was 3 years old, I guess, and she was 5 or 6 years old.
Wow.
When they would go to the cellar of our home on Prospect Street, they shut all the lights out. Everybody in town would shut all the lights out and go down cellar. The windows were all blocked out, and that's where you'd sleep and apparently could have a light on to do whatever you needed to do. My father, in turn, had one of those old woody station wagons with real wood on the side of it. And that was the only one in town, so that was designated the town ambulance. So when the siren went off, the whistle in the center, he would go to I'm not sure if it was the town hall or the little fire station that's on the center playground now, but he would go there and wait to the end of the drill in case they needed to, somebody got hurt and they needed to transport him to a hospital in Springfield. So that was one story about the war, and the other story, that the first thing I remember as a little kid, and I would have been 3, was my sister. The siren was going off. This was during the day at this point, and the war was over, and my sister calling over across the street to Carol Powers. She later became Mrs. Carol Fontaine, that the war was over. And that's the first thing I remember from my childhood is that call across the street, the war's over.
A moment in history, and you remember it.
Yeah. So that's all my war stories for the time being. But anyway, I went to Center School, which is on High Street in East Longmeadow. The little red schoolhouse is there now.
Oh, yes.
But at the time, Center School was, I don't know, it was 2 stories, had maybe 8 or 10 rooms. And I went to 1st to 3rd grade there. It was within walking distance of my parents' house and on Prospect Street, or a very short bike ride. Except you couldn't ride your bikes down the hill from there to Prospect Street because the principal, Miss Glenn, would not allow anybody to ride their bike down that hill because it was too steep. I learned that early on. Miss Glenn was a legend in town. And but anyway, went to center school, and first to third grade. In fourth grade, I went to a brand spanking new Birchland Park School #1. And it was where the current Birchland Park School is now. The same plot. And I went from fourth grade to ninth grade there. There was a little wing on I guess it's the south side of the building that was for the elementary school, 4 through 6. And then there's a set of doors, and then the junior high school was beyond that. After junior high school, East Long Meadow didn't have a high school at that point. So all the East Long Meadow students went into Springfield, which was really a pretty good deal, I thought, because you had the choice of 4 different high schools to go to. I chose to go to technical high school. My sisters went to classical high school. There was Commerce right up the street, which is still there, I believe. And then Cathedral at the time was right on, I think it was Elliott Street, right next to Tech. And so the buses would go in and stop, let people off at Classical Tech or Cathedral, and just drive up the hill and let people off at Commerce. Oh, and the fourth one was Trade, which is now Putnam, and that was just a little bit further up State Street. So East Long Meadow students had a choice of, I guess it's 5 schools they could go to in Springfield. That was pretty good, but that ended shortly after I graduated from high school in 1960. I think it was 2 years, and East Long Meadow had built the high school, and everybody was going to high school. After I got out of high school, I went to Iowa State University. I guess we haven't mentioned my family-owned community feed stores, which was where the depot is today and where Graham Central Station is. That was on that property behind it, for those who are newer in town. And community feed stores was my father's life and my life. How did all that happen? My father was Canadian. He went on what was then Ontario Agricultural College. Now it's the University of Guelph. It's probably the size of UMass. And when he graduated from there, he came to the United States and bought cream in the Midwest for a company called Blue Valley Creamery. I'm not quite sure where they were headquarters, but he would call on farmers and get them to ship the cream, mostly by rail, to the nearest milk processing facility where they could make cream and butter and whatever. He did that for a year or two, and then took a job as a feed salesman with the Quaker Oats Company. And he sold feeds to farmers for the Quaker Oats Company in Connecticut. And somewhere around 1928, the Quaker Oats Company decided they wanted to get into the retail feed business. So they created a chain of community feed stores up the Connecticut River Valley. There was one in East Long Meadow, East Hampton, Deerfield. I think there was one in Ashfield or somewhere up in there. Brattleboro, Vermont. Bellows Falls, Vermont, and Westminster Station, Vermont. The one at Westminster Station is still open, as is the one in East Hampton. It's under a different name now. It's under Westfield Feeds. But he was named general manager of them. And in those days, they formulated the feed, manufactured the feed, and sold it to what was then mostly dairy, I believe. So that went on from around 1928 until 1938 or 9, and it was during the Depression and all those years. And I guess it didn't make enough money for the chain of stores, didn't make enough money for the board of directors out in Chicago of the Quaker Oats. So they told my father to sell them. And he said, well, what are you going to do with me? And they said, don't worry, we'll find a job for you. But anyway, he decided to buy the one at East Long Meadow. And he went in partners with the fellow who was manager at Westminster Station, Vermont. And the two of them, his name was Charlie Wright, and he had the money. I guess my father was close enough, so they bought the one at East Hampton, and that was part of our family for right up until we closed the store in East Long Meadow, and the one in East Hampton's still operating as a feed store, although the type of business has changed.
Jim, I'm a city girl and not very agricultural. So tell me, if I went into community feed in 1940, what would I see? Was it feed for cows? Dairy?
It was mostly dairy feeds, poultry feeds also. I can remember when I was 14, 15, taking 5 ton of chicken feed to Agawam, Feeding Hills, and carrying half of it up to the second floor of a chicken coop. There was 100-pound bags, put them on your shoulder and go up the stairs.
Wow.
And we'd send usually 2 people, and when I went, there was third, I sat at that age, and half would go on the first floor, half would go on the second floor. And we sold a lot of poultry feed to places, and especially in Feeding Hills. But community feed stores also in 1940 sold anthracite coal and hardware, mostly farm-type hardware, shovels, forks, brooms,
So we were much more
That sort of-
agricultural then.
Oh, yes.
There was more call for chicken
there were-
feed maybe than today.
Well, yes, and dairy. There were several dairy farms in East Long Meadow and in Summers and what have you that were active. I didn't even think there was one in Long Meadow. So, and Hamden was always had farms of various kinds. And over the years, that mix kind of changed from dairy feeds to pet foods and horse feeds, rabbit pellets, that sort of thing, as the area became more populated and
Yeah, I would go in there and buy bird seed.
yeah,
You had tons of yeah.
That
And
became
it was like, I don't know if you ever went in there.
I did, but it was 20 years ago,
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
yeah.
like stepping back in time to go into community feed. It was great atmosphere.
so birdseed became a very
Probably a major,
significant part of our
yeah.
business behind horse feed. And then the other thing would be first farm fertilizers and seeds, but that kind of changed to grass fertilizers and grass seed and what have you.
So you changed with the times.
Well,
The market changed and community feed changed.
Yeah, you had to. Yeah. So, and if you look at A.W. Brown now, that's changed even more to all pet toys and birds and that kind of. The whole business has gone that direction.
And they were right across the street.
Originally, yes.
Yeah.
It was a Prina store, right across Maple Street, where Dunkin' Donuts is now.
Right.
And we were competitors.
Yeah.
Actually, community feed stores in the 1930s was at the location where Dunkin' Donuts is now. First of all feed stores were on railroad tracks because the feed and the coal and what have you came in by rail. So in East Long Meadow, that's how the rail trail
was the spot.
and what have you. So both feed stores were right across the street from each other. The track came down and there was a switch at the depot that we had a siding for our feed, and there was another switch back by the lumber yard that switched feeds into the Prina store.
Okay, right.
So I guess maybe East Long Meadow was the feed capital of Western Massachusetts for a few years anyway.
Of our town.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So I think we took you out of college, Jim. You said you were in Iowa for college?
Yeah, I went to Iowa State University. I wanted to go into agricultural business, and I visited one or two colleges around New England, and I don't know, they didn't turn me on too much. And my father said, well, do you want to go out and see Iowa State? Iowa State was one on my list, so was University of Wisconsin. So we flew out to Iowa State one weekend, called ahead, told them we were coming. And it was completely different. Iowa State's about 30 miles from Des Moines in Ames, Iowa. So they actually had sent somebody down to pick us up and brought us back to Ames and put us up in the student union, and really made us welcome. The assistant dean of agriculture wanted to get students there from outside of Iowa. You know, they wanted to have, in a sense, diversity, and nothing would do, but I come to Iowa State. They didn't give me a scholarship or anything, but they just really made us welcome, and that that's where I went, and I was there for 4 years. Agriculture was quite a bit different in Iowa then as it is today, but it was mainly corn and soybeans. Where in Massachusetts, we took the corn and soybeans and oats and what have you, and sold them for cattle and horses and what have you. But while I was at Iowa State was a land grant college. So if you went there in 1960, which was the year I went out after I graduated from tech, land grant colleges had to, all males had to take ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps. It was mandatory. You didn't have a choice. Of course, the draft was on. And so I took Navy ROTC for 2 years. Then I knew as soon as I got out of the service, I was going to get drafted. So I thought, well, if I'm going to get drafted, I might as well go in as an officer. So I
control your fate. You wanted to control your fate a little bit.
Yeah. So I stuck with it. There weren't too many ag students in Navy ROTC. They were more in Army or Air Force ROTC. But anyway, I graduated in 1964, summer of 1964. I was a semester behind because I had to take these Navy courses and they didn't fit in with my ag courses too well. But anyway, so I graduated in June, I think it was, or July, and got my bachelor's degree. And 10 minutes later, I was in my dress whites, and 10 minutes later, dress whites with a sword. That was full-blown uniform. And then 10 minutes later, I was sworn in. I got my commission in the Navy, and shortly thereafter, I reported to U.S. Navy Damage Control School in Philadelphia.
You still have the sword?
You know, my wife sold it at a tag sale about 2 years ago for $5.
A piece of history is somewhere
well,
else.
it sat in our cellar for 50 years. You know,
Might as well.
That was the only time I was in the Navy. I had a 2-year commitment, which wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. It was 2 of the most exciting years of my life, and forgot what I was going to say now. But the sword hung in our cellar for 50 years. She said, "That's going," so it went. But anyway, that leads me into when I came back in 1966. Several things changed. I came back to community feed stores. I lived with my folks for a while up on Prospect Street and worked with my father. And I had to come back because I probably would have stayed in the Navy a little longer, but Vietnam was just building up up at that point. And actually, I can remember they sent out a message for people with small boat experience if they wanted to train to go to Vietnam. I thought that would be exciting. It turns out most of those persons got sprayed with 2,4-D and had issues later on in life. But I came back, and one of the first things I noted, I was working right on community feed right on Maple Street. We had a volunteer fire department at the time, and a fire horn would go off and you'd wait and wait and wait. And 6 or 7 or 8 minutes later, you might hear a truck go out. So one day I went over to the fire station. Chief Leahy was in charge. He was the only full-time and I'm not sure he was full-time, but he was the chief. And I said, look, I've had experience when I was in the Navy. I went to Damage Control School, part of that shipboard firefighting. And when I was on the ship, which was in Newport, Rhode Island, I was in charge of all the firefighting things and a whole lot of other things. So I had some experience in it. And I'd been driving trucks since I was 12 years old. We had a fuel oil business. I made my first fuel oil delivery when I was 14. Didn't have a driver's license, let alone a CDL or a hazmat or anything. So somebody ran out of oil at 5:30 at night, and the drivers had just gone home. Of course, you didn't have cell phones back there. So my father said, can you drive the truck? I said, yeah, I've been driving trucks around the yard at community feed stores and up and down Maple Court, which is right next to it. Yeah. So I drove the truck up to Chestnut Street, right on the curve on Chestnut Street, backed in the lady's driveway, filled her tank with oil, went down cellar and primed the burner, got her going, and came back to the store. My father was with me, but he didn't drive, and he just kind of watched me. But I'd been riding with the drivers. I knew how to do all that. So
You had great on-the-job training.
yeah. So anyway, I told the fire chief, well, he says, well, we don't have drivers. And I says, well, I could drive about anything short of a tractor trailer. And I says, well, I'm a couple hundred feet away. I've had some training in firefighting. Would you like me to become a member of your volunteer fire company? They called it a call fire department, which is you got paid a few dollars for responding to an alarm. So I became a member of the fire department pretty quick. One of the first fires I went to was a mutual aid call out in Wilbraham. And we were going to go out and stand by their station because they were busy at a fire in town. And the fire whistle went off, and I went over to the station, and there's 3 or 4 people standing around and nobody to drive. I had never been driven in a fire truck at that point. I was just only been on a couple of weeks, and I remember Chief Lee, he turned to me and says, can you drive that? And I says, I think so. I said, well, I have no idea how to pump any water or anything. And Mike Morosino was standing there, and he says, I think I can know how to pump water. So the 4 of us jumped on the truck and drove out to Wilbraham. Well, the shifting pattern on the truck was one that I had never encountered before. So I ground gears all the way from the center up Pleasant Street and all the way to Parker Street. Finally, I found a little shifting pattern on the dashboard and figured out that fifth was over here, not up there, and what have you. And we got to Wilbraham, and I said, well, what are we going to do if we have to go to a fire? And Mike,
no GPS, right?
Right. Well, worse than that, I didn't know how to pump water.
Yeah.
So Mike showed me how to pump water, and fortunately, nothing happened that day. So, and a little while later, after I got married in 1968, I lived for a year on Pleasant Street. And I was like 5 houses up from the center. And I was, when the fire alarm went off at night, those days you had a bell in the house, and the bell was wired to every firefighter's house, and the police department just pushed a button, and this huge bell, it was about a foot across, rang and woke you up, and you knew there was a fire.
And everyone else in your house.
Yeah, you didn't know where it was or anything about it, but
Wow.
That's how you went to the stations. So anyway, shortly after I was married, and Marcia and I were on Pleasant Street, and the first night the alarm went off, so down to the station, into the truck. And it was at the nursing home at the end of Maple Street, right on the Long Meadow line, and it was an alarm. So I drove the truck down. Well, it was dark. It was 2 or so in the morning, and there was no traffic on the street. So I was trying to hit the button on the floor to get the high beams up so I could see a little better. The siren was going and going. But finally, we got to about Westwood Avenue. Archie Plant was sitting in the seat next to me. And I said, Archie, why are you blowing the siren? He looks, he says, I'm not blowing the siren, you are.
At 2 in the morning.
So I woke everybody up on Maple Street. For no good reason. There was not a really fire. We just the early days of home or business fire alarms, there were a lot of false alarms. I don't think there's quite as many anymore, but I certainly woke everybody up, and I apologized to them. If anybody remembers, that was about 1967, I'd say. 68.
That's how we learn.
Yeah.
My experience.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, other fires of memory were the Hafey fire, where there were 4 people killed.
Yes.
And doesn't come to
If
mind.
it comes back to you, we'll circle
Doesn't
back.
come so anyway, for most of the time since I got back from the Navy, I've been somehow involved in the 4th of July celebration in town. The fireworks, the parade, and what have you. And how did that all get started? Well, in 1967, somebody wanted to borrow a community feed store's truck to have a float in a parade, or a group of people. I don't remember exactly who it was. But anyway, I went down the morning of the 4th, got the truck out of the garage, took it over. The parade started at Birchland Park at that point. Took it over to Birchland Park and found who I was giving it to, and then there was a lot going on. And I was just kind of standing there. I wasn't sure how I was going to get back to community feed. I figured I'd walk, but just watching, and Pete Andrews came by. He says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "Well, I brought a truck over for..." Pete Andrews was my Little League coach, and he was connected with the church my parents went to, and he ran an insurance agency in town, McDonald and Johnson, that our family had done business with. So anyway, I said, "I'm just kind of watching." He says, "Well, I need you to drive a car in the parade." He says, "I got this convertible and I need somebody. I don't have a driver. Can you drive it for me?" So I said, "Sure, I'll drive." I was sure there was going to be a bunch of beauty queens in it. And I was pretty young at the time, and I thought that would be a good opportunity. Well, turns out it was the clergy.
Oh,
Father Wallahan and 2 or 3 ministers, all of whom were twice my age. So that was my first job in the parade. But,
glamorous, very glamorous.
Yeah, so it didn't turn out the way I expected. But anyway, for the rest of right to this year, I've been involved in the parade or the fireworks in some manner or fashion. And just the other day, I signed a contract for 2023 fireworks on July 3rd. So
Mark your calendars.
yeah. So that's been a lot of fun. And over the years, I don't walk the parade route anymore. But for a while, my father-in-law had a scooter, and I was, they called a roving marshal, and I'd drive up and down on my scooter and make sure everything was going good and handle any incidents that might happen. And there always seems to be something happen during the parade that needs attention. So the other thing I've been involved in for 52 years is Rotary Club. And this is one reason I'm here today, I think. But
It certainly is, Jimmy. You don't have a low profile.
yeah. So I'm the last surviving charter member of East Long Meadow Rotary Club. We started in 1970, and I got involved. I was only 28 years old at the time, I think, when Jimmy Welch, who was manager of Shawmut Bank on Maple Street, called me up one day and said, "Hey, Jim, we're going to start a Rotary Club, and we're going to have a meeting. I wonder if you'd like to come and consider it." So back up a step or two, my father, Archie, was a charter member of the East Long Meadow Lions Club. I think it started in 1940. And he also was a very active member of the Springfield Kiwanis Club. And he and my mother had gone to Israel on a tour of the Holy Land. And they were out of town when this meeting happened. And I went to the meeting. Pete Andrews was there, Jimmy Welts, and there were two people in town that everybody knew. One was Rayburn Benton. He was Peter Benton's grandfather. And Rayburn was a member of the Springfield Kiwanis Club. The other one was Al Morrison, and he owned a business in town. It was a perfume business called the Vernet Sai, I think, if I remember correctly. So they were designated from Springfield Rotary to get a Rotary Club started in East Long Meadow. They both lived in East Long Meadow, had business in East Long Meadow, etc. So they told us about Rotary and what have you. And by the end of the meeting, I'd signed up to be a charter member of East Long Meadow Rotary. And this was in the spring of 1970. And I've been, I wasn't as active in the early days. We had a lot of important people in town. One was Jim Davis, who owned American Saw. He was a charter member. There was another fellow from Milton Bradley who was the second in, I can't remember his name right now, but he was second in command of Milton Bradley, immediately below Jim Shea, who was the family owned it at that time. Mm-hmm. But and others, the plant manager of R.E. Phelan, that was next door to Community Fees. Unfortunately, it's vacant right now, but that was a major thriving business at the time. So they started the club, and here we are 52 years later. I'm still there.
Well, and for those who might not realize this, the Rotary Club is so active in East Long Meadow 52 years later still. The summer concerts, I would say 6 or 8 of them every summer, put on by the Rotary Club, celebrate East Long Meadow, wonderful scholarship program for East Long Meadow high school students. They do a lot. What else? What am I missing, Jim?
Well, we gave out $20,000 in scholarships last year, a little over $20,000. But you covered most of them. The concert series is one of our bigger endeavors, but it goes on for 8 weeks, 8 concerts. Mm-hmm. They support the 4th of July parade.
Huge.
And
fireworks, right?
Not only with financially and we do the fireworks now. We took that over from the JCs when they ceased to be able to do it. And
the carnival.
Yes, and the carnival.
Huge projects for a group of 30 dedicated people. So if anyone would like to join them, they seem really nice.
Yes, they could contact any Rotarian or contact me, and we'll invite you to a meeting and explain what we do. And we're always looking for new members. We meet on Thursday noon, but the attendance requirements have been relaxed over the years, and You can be an active member of Rotary and probably never come to a meeting, but if you want. So we are be happy if anybody's interested to tell them more about us.
Great.
So I covered fire department and Rotary and the parade. For the last 22 or 3 years, I've been treasurer of Billings Hill Cemetery. Billings Hill Cemetery is at the corner of Pease Road and Prospect Street. That wasn't part of my planned retirement, but back in around 1998 or so, the people that were doing it, Ansel Miller and his wife, who lived just over the line in Connecticut, wanted to retire. So my good neighbor Jim McKnight, who lived in this town for many, many years, he was president, I was treasurer, and that went on until a few years ago, and Jim got so it was too hard for him to do it, so somehow I inherited doing most of the work, although I have a good board now that are stepping up and helping me with it. So it's not a busy job, but we've seen our assets grow during that time from around 80,000 to over 400,000. So
for financial planning, call Jim Rintoul. Just kidding.
So we're in pretty good financial shape, although that has to last us forever because we don't have any more plots to sell, and our income is, just a little bit on each burial at this point. So we do have cremation plots to sell. We don't have any conventional plots to sell.
Jim, you have done so much in East Longmeadow and seen so much. It's really fascinating to see the evolution in the town. And what a great town it is. Do you have any parting words for us?
Just that East Longmeadow is a great place to live, to go to school, and it takes everybody in town to make that happen, and everybody needs to do their thing, whether it's running these podcasts or helping at the senior center or helping with the parade or the numerous other things in town of concerts. And if everybody does that, it's going to continue to be a really good place to live and work, I think.
Great closing. Any final words from you, Eric? Or questions from Jim? What have we missed?
Well, Jim, you've seen a lot of changes, of course, here in town, and I'm wondering if there's anything that really surprised you of the changes that have happened?
A little surprised. There's two what were major businesses in town that have vacant buildings, probably largely because of environmental issues, but the packaged machinery area and the RE Phelan area. That those have deteriorated, and there certainly are challenges for the town to come up with a solution for them. But other than that, any other surprises? I would say I'm surprised that we can't keep our roads a little better. There's a lot of streets in town to my mind, are pretty bumpy. And it's partly because they've been dug up for various utility issues and what have you. Probably partly because we didn't have or didn't allocate the money it takes to keep them up. And
Yeah, right now, Shaker Road is not in good shape.
well, even, Prospect Street in front of my house is part of it's real good. And my house is mainly because I can't remember. I've lived there 50 years and I don't ever remember it being paved. It may have been once, but that's a long time, especially when there's building going on and they have to dig up and
Right.
put in the utilities and then patch them and what have you. But
Yeah.
that's, I guess I'm surprised, or at least wish we could do a little better, but there's only so much money to go
Right,
around.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I do think that, the DPW, I mean, they're doing all they can do. It's like they're a good group, but, yeah, it's
Kind of a never-ending
yeah, it
challenge.
really is. Yeah.
But it's been a good town to live in and for
Absolutely.
80 years that I have. So I can't complain about that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for coming in and doing this. This is really, really interesting. For me, as a history buff, apparently, it's been a real pleasure to be able to talk to you. So thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so that wraps up another episode of Stories from the View. We'd like to thank Jim Rintoul for being here. The Stories from the View podcast is available on the LCAT 01028 channel on YouTube. And if you have a story that you'd like to share on the program, contact the Pleasant View Senior Center Director, Aaron Kobler. You can stop by the Pleasant View Senior Center, or you can call Aaron at 413-525-5436, extension 1401, or send Aaron an email at aaron.kobler@eastlongmeadowma.gov. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Stories from the View.